All right, my name is Tim Harvey. I'm the Customer Renewable Solutions Manager at Austin Energy. And this is a stakeholder meeting for the standard offer for community solar. So I will jump right in. If I can get the slide to advance.
Clicking on the slide.
There we go. Okay, today we're going to talk about the feed-in tariff approach. We're going to discuss about the impacts to variable pricing versus static pricing, property tax exemptions and how that will work, low-income bonus credit as far as the federal tax credit, the additional federal tax credit that's eligible for these projects, interconnection and associated impacts, and then we'll have some stakeholder feedback and discussion. I'm getting old, I'm gonna have to whip out my glasses here. Okay. So as we've been exploring the opportunities here for the standard offer, we've been looking at this internally and trying to figure out what the best way for us to be able to manage this from an operations perspective is. We want to make sure that we have operations that are efficient and aren't going to cause problems on our end from a staffing and resource perspective, as well as options that will work for you guys. So what we've been exploring recently in lieu of a power purchase agreement, which is particularly administratively burdensome for us, is the idea of a feed-in tariff. So whereas a power purchase agreement is a contract that we would, if we went that route, we would standardize it, but it is an individual contract that we would have to maintain with y'all. And so there would be multiple individual contracts, multiple invoices settling and all of that. With a feed-in tariff approach, it's a tariff. So it's built in, there's no contract in place. If you've built a system that meets our requirement, you're eligible for the feed-in tariff. We would pay you, or the way it would look right now, and this is all still under formation, but we would be able to pay you from the billing system automatically, which allows us to enable scaling, and it would be on a monthly basis rather than potentially like a quarterly basis. So that might help y'all with your finances, and it would just simplify things and make them more robust and automated from our perspective. So,
questions, Tim?
Yes, sir.
When you say we're getting compensated through the billing system, does that mean we have to have a active Austin Energy account that's going to receive a credit against it?
We would probably have you set up a vendor account of some sort.
Not a consumption.
Right, not a consumption account. And then you would receive a check directly from the system. That's still to be worked out. So, take all that with the caveat that, that could change in some small way. As I said, that helps us not only with administrative efficiencies, but also with tracking and reporting over time. And so my questions to y'all, and I'll just open this up right now, is do we have people here or online that have experience with feed-in tariff programs? And if so, if you could share some advantages or disadvantages of those from your perspective, and things that we may need to explore further in regards to a feed-in tariff. Maybe it's tax implications or some other, issue that you've encountered over time with other feed-in tariff programs.
Is the feed-in tariff, is it locked in?
We'll talk about that in a minute.
Okay, and then Is there gonna be like a performance guarantee along with it? Or if it's available, y'all are willing to buy?
Right, so the feed-in tariff would basically say that we're gonna pay X amount for every kilowatt hour that's produced, and then cut you a check for that on a monthly basis. Or some periodic basis, I would
Is
assume.
there a term, like a,
No, the thing about a feed-in tariff is there would probably not be an end term, but there could be. So that's something, that's part of we'll get into that discussion a little bit down the road. And I think I saw that someone online had some experience. If you want to jump in and share, we'd appreciate that.
Sure, I'll jump in. Thanks, Samuel. A lot of my experience would be in exploring projects in California, the feed-in tariff, and essentially the economics of the project are going to be adjusted according to having storage, so that the energy generated would be discharged for the utility at the time they need it the most.
Mm-hmm.
And so having like a flat rate for the entire timeline, it doesn't do justice to the economics of, hey, now we have to scope in storage and make this work best for everybody. So I probably want to highlight that to say that, whether it's 7 cents or what have you, like a 15-minute interval that we could agree on, there might be a path forward.
Okay, so talking about is like a dynamic rate that would be like a time of production where you get a certain value for one part of the day, but during peak times you get a higher value, and then that would influence the adoption of batteries as well.
Correct. So whether it's adoption of batteries or simply just doing like an east-west or a fixed tilt, so we could work that into our design to basically offset demand when you need it the most,
Mm-hmm.
and influence the economics of everything.
Okay, so I think that's one approach, and we could definitely talk about that internally and consider that. So thank you for that.
one nice thing with the feed-in tariff that Southern Power and Georgia Power offered is that like the feed-in tariff, like you were locked into that rate with that interconnection. So as like new technologies come on board, such as batteries, whatever, as long as you have that interconnection, then you're locked into that rate. You can always install like new panels or batteries and other things.
So the rate never changes. It's locked in. Is it for a period of years or?
Yes. Yeah, for a period of years.
Okay, so it says, okay, it publishes a rate that says that we're going to pay X cents per kilowatt hour for X number of years. And then no matter what size system you have, you're locked in at that.
Right.
So even if you go back in the future and expand that system, then is that allowed, or is
Yes.
it is allowed?
Yes. I mean, as long as like, you're not, affecting like the impact study that was originally done.
Right, yeah, it has to be, from an interconnection standpoint, it has to be approved.
Right. The one, I think, downside to their program was that I felt like they kind of made it super complicated, that the tariff was, well, one thing is like you had to pay separate for the impact study. And third is that they made it to where different areas, there was different tariff rates.
They were trying to influence specific areas that they were trying to get
Yes.
more production out of, so they might have had higher.
Right.
Okay.
Okay, because it was complex and not as standardized, it might have been a detriment to the
Right.
program.
I felt like people were kind of gaming the system a little bit.
Okay. But that it could have been an approach to non-wires alternatives where they're saying, hey, we're noticing capacity growth in this area.
These urban areas, right? That's probably what it was. Just from like our side, trying to be competitive in the market, it was challenging.
Can you mute online, please?
How you asked where that was? It was Georgia Power, you said?
Mm-hmm.
Southern.
Southern Power and Georgia Power.
Okay. I'm sorry, can you mute online, please?
We mute him.
Maybe, yeah.
They're muted.
Okay. Awesome. Does anyone else have any feedback or on their experience with feed-in tariffs?
I just wanted to ask, was my mention of battery or storage one of the first instances that's come up, or have you already, has Austin Energy already been considering that as part of the project scope?
We've had some internal discussion around that. I'm not sure that I could say that it's within the project scope at this point, but I would also say that it hasn't been explicitly excluded from the project scope. We have been, talking around to other utilities that have feed-in tariff and have encountered that same tariff design for some Southern California offerings. However, I guess their price isn't right because they haven't had any uptake in that program. So that's also lessons that we want to take away. We want to have a program that successfully, results in projects. But all of the experience that we can get and understand and wrap our heads around will help us to ensure that we're developing the right size program and a program hopefully that has the simplicity that's needed, but yet enough complexity to increase the value to its potential, and have that uptake that we're looking for, and also even potentially the flexibility that we need to drive that. So that's kind of our philosophy and where we're trying to head. But it's very complicated, as you know. So it's taking a lot of effort to get there, and that's to be expected, right?
Absolutely. Samuel, appreciate your candor on that. I would just say, as you're planning it, I'm super encouraged as a developer to hear about how open-handed you are in this, and it would be a municipal utility that would take that approach, because this is something that would be best not just for the developer, but for the end user and the utility to have something that works for everybody. And the current program in California has been extended to, I believe, December for a ruling, and a lot of that is just because of that red tape that I'm mentioning. So my follow-up question there, before I just let things go on, is there a current rate schedule that you guys use to dictate to the customer that, hey, this is peak time, non-peak, and is that something that we could discuss further and you can disclose to us?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, we've not really explored a lot of the battery things, but we do know that what time those peak times occur. It's generally around 5 o'clock. Peak starts and stops around 8. But we also know that time is shifting as more solar is adopted within the ERCOT market. So we definitely keep an eye on that. We would, look to be able to adjust that over time, most likely, if we were to go with that kind of approach. But again, that's not something that we've discussed extensively here. But I would say we're open to those discussions. And then I'll also say to Tom, we're going to cover kind of some different options as it would pertain to a feed-in tariff approach. But I do think that we're pointed in that direction towards a feed-in tariff. So I'll say that much. That's some progress that we've made, and you know, we're at a point where we're really needing to kind of solidify our direction and approach, and we're getting there, and we want to make sure we had some more feedback from y'all before we get down to that solidification, which will need to happen here, you know, pretty soon, so that we can put everything in place to enable our projected launch in October. Okay, so to that end, I'm going to give y'all a little bit, what's the yearly term you're looking for to offer? So the terms and prices are something that we're going to be discussing here. We'll get to that. So I'm going to kind of go over what the value of solar structure is, because I want you guys to understand, you know, how we determine our avoided costs for energy that's produced on the distribution grid, and how we're currently compensating solar customers that we have that are, you know, where our customers are putting solar behind the meter. So there are basically three avoided cost components that we currently look at for the value of solar. And those are ERCOT energy savings, ancillary services savings, and transmission savings. And then the value of solar also has an added value that's based on the societal cost of carbon. Go into the technical evaluation of that. So the methodology to ascertain what the energy savings are to Austin Energy for distributed solar are this. So it's based on the weighted average price for energy at the time of generation. So we're looking at that generation curve, and we're matching that curve up to our Austin Energy day-ahead node on the market. So those market prices fluctuate throughout the day, as does solar generation. So as that aligns, we use that to determine what the energy savings for a typical solar project are. Transmission savings. So this component is based on the average PV generation during the ERCOT 4 CP or 4 coincident peak periods, and multiplied by the ERCOT postage stamp rate, which is the sum of the individual wholesale transmission service charges billed by each transmission service provider in ERCOT. And then we divide that by the total generation, and both of those formulas are shown here. And so basically, to put that in pretty simple terms, for the 4 summer months, ERCOT measures our peak consumption. Can you please online? Thank you. So they're looking at the peak consumption of Austin Energy during each of those 4 months. Then that goes into determining what our transmission costs are for the rest of the next year. So, and then we set it again in the next summer for the following year. So that's how that works. So to the extent that we can reduce those peaks in each one of those months, that helps us to reduce our transmission costs. So, and then finally, there are environmental services. So this is based on the weighted average price of ancillary services. So this is based on the average price for ancillary services at the time of PV generation. ERCOT has 4 ancillary service products that support transmission and energy to loads and the reliable operation of the bulk electric system. So that's reg up, reg down, responsive reserve, and non-spending reserve. The ancillary service savings is calculated as the sum of the scaled ancillary service price, which is the sum of the 4 different ancillary service products in each hour, scaled to its relevant proportion on the overall ERCOT energy load. And for each hour multiplied by PV generation for the same hour, divided by the PV generation as shown in the formula below. I know that's a bit complicated, but it represents an additional value that Austin Energy has for the ancillary services benefit for the value of solar. There's one additional calculation that's brought in to all of these equations, and that is line loss. So when you're transporting or transmitting energy from generation to load and going over a distance, no matter what that distance is, there's a certain amount of line loss that occurs. So we calculate that, and then that goes to scale up these different results of these equations so that we can incorporate that line loss, because we know that the majority of the generation that's happening is consumed near that generation source. So there's very little line loss there, if any. And then finally, the societal benefits. So City Council recognizes that there are environmental impacts to carbon, and that those environmental impacts result in cost to society. And as such, we have developed a methodology that ties the societal cost of carbon report from the U.S. Energy Information Administration, from the federal government we tie that to the U.S. Energy Information Administration's valuation of the Texas ERCOT market and the carbon emissions of that market. And so we come up with a societal benefit calculation that is an adder to the value of solar. So right now, the value of solar rate is 9.91 cents per kilowatt hour. And that was based off of test year 2021. At the end of the base rate case, there was a settlement agreement that basically requires us to not change the value of solar rate more frequently than once every 3 years. And when we do, it is based on the average of the previous 5 years of analysis. So as you might calculate, the rate is never any closer than 2.5 years behind schedule, and can get up to 5.5 years behind schedule. So that can impact that rate. But that said, over time, the market prices do come through. So that methodology is intended to smooth out the volatility of the value of solar methodology, and it can fluctuate over, from year to year based on what's happening in the market on those years. So it definitely helps to smooth out that value. So you might wonder, well, why is Tim telling us all about this value of solar stuff? And that is because there is a possibility, and we want to entertain the idea that we could potentially peg the standard offer price to the value of solar, so that a interconnection on the utility side of the meter would be valued the same as the value of solar, and then the only difference in that scenario is rather than provide that credit to a customer that owns the system behind the meter, we provide a check for the same amount to a developer or system owner with an interconnection ahead of the meter. So I'm going to just go ahead and kind of go out of order here and say, oops, okay. Well, I'd like to hear y'all's feedback, and what the impacts would be to going that route, to tying to the value of solar, which again, changes every 3 years based on the market, and is a variable rate over time. That approach as compared to locking in a value that's, probably less, but standard and consistent for a period of time, like say 20 years. So if I could get any feedback on the differences between those two approaches from a financing perspective, which I guess is the perspective that we're really kind of looking for, and a viability perspective, from y'all, that's what I'm seeking right now. So I'll open the floor.
A variable rate's hard to finance.
Variable rates harder to finance. Understood.
I mean, it's not like impossible.
3 year?
Yeah, I think, so I've talked to some of our private equity partners about it, and I think they're all certain that the rate's always going to be going up or stay the same. And so.
But the risk.
There would be no guarantee of that, just so you know.
Yes, yeah, there'd be no guarantee. I think their response was that our end users are basically taking the same risk when they buy PPAs from us, that their avoided cost is always going to be increasing. So their savings would always be increasing. And so it's the savings in this aspect would be their return on investment to the.
Can you guys hear that online?
I mean, I guess it's not a deal killer. It's not like ideal, but I think
It adds maybe a tolerable amount of risk.
it does.
And I think I'm seeing some suggestions here in the chat, that
I think the biggest one is that they would want to know that the program was going to be around for a certain amount of time.
right, and
After 3 years, y'all could just not scrap the program. That like, listen, we have commitment to run this program for 30 years.
That, what's interesting about that is I think in some ways that becomes a little bit like a chicken and egg problem too, because you're saying they would want an assurance. What determines that assurance is participation in the program. If we see no participation, that puts the pressure on folding the program versus, no, there's a lot of participation. There's every reason to keep the program going. So they kind of work together, if that makes sense.
Right. Well,
Yeah.
I mean, if you had to scrap the program, then I would say that there could be language that says that people that are in the program can get paid.
yeah, and so that's kind of what is being suggested here, like require a backstop to the variable rate so that it could never drop below a certain amount, or something to that effect. If the value of solar changes and we go to net metering or something else, that this would stay the same, some kind of assurance that this isn't just going to drop off the map and everybody's going to be left high and dry. So to that end, I think that it's extremely unlikely that we would do that to our customers, because let's remember, we have 130 megawatts of solar that is customer owned currently getting the value of solar rate. So, there is probably it's probably highly unlikely that we would, totally abandon those customers.
Yeah. One other thing is that, exactly what you're doing is making the formulas transparent and giving historical data of the value of solar, how that was calculated. I think.
Well, it seems to be clear that the only history is back to 2021, so it's not very long history, right? And you only have one price in that period. Is that what I heard, Tim? Like, no.
Sorry,
change-
I'm off.
Sure, no changes in the value of solar since 2021 when you said it.
No. In 2000, the test year that the methodology was based on for the current value of solar was 2021.
I think the value of solar has been going on longer than 20
since 2012.
Okay, so there is a lot of.
So it's varied between 12 point, I think it was 12.8 cents. And currently it's
That was
9.91
pre-fracking.
cents. So it's been in between there.
Didn't it went down and then went back up?
It went down and then it went back up. And,
This is a new
and
methodology.
part of it's because of the methodology. So prior to the current methodology, we were taking a forward-looking approach that was heavily tied to gas futures, natural gas futures. And when fracking came, that increased the natural gas supply dramatically, which brought the natural gas futures down, which brought the value of solar down. But now we look at ERCOT market prices, and it's tied to measurable and known, things, so that we're very confident that the price is right for the previous year or the year of analysis, because it's all based on known and measurable data.
When was this put into place?
So the current value of solar was put into place in 2023, March of 2023. So it will change again in March of 2026, and it will incorporate these most recent 5 years of assessments. And we've also got an assessment for 2020.
So it should go up.
It could go up.
It could go up.
Let's
It's
say we should. I'm just kidding.
well,
No, but basically prices went up quite a bit right after COVID.
yes, and to some extent, the variables that affect our pricing affect the value of solar as well. So someone said here, a workable, this is Saeed, I hope I said that right, Saeed.
It's Shay.
Shay, this is Shay. You want to go ahead and make your statement, Shay?
Yeah, sure. So obviously I hear some of the concerns about the challenges for financing. This isn't too different from some of the community solar programs in other states that basically have a variable rate, and those are financed on a fairly routine basis. But I think what would definitely help is if there could be an attempt to at least have a fixed rate for the first, let's say, 5 years or 7 years of the program, just to help with the financing, because I think a lot of lenders and tax equity providers will obviously be somewhat leery about jumping into a new program that is entirely variable from the get-go. But if the rates could be fixed for the first few years, I think that would definitely help get a lot of them over the hump.
Okay, so the idea of having a mixed one where it's fixed at first and then migrates to a variable rate.
Exactly, and that could actually be kind of a feature of the program where any new project that gets approved to join the program has a fixed rate for the first, let's say, 5 years, and then subsequent years are purely on the variable value of solar price.
Okay, any other comments or questions about variable versus fixed?
Jim, I apologize. I was going through security, so I missed a bunch of stuff there. But I heard you say that these interconnections would be on the utility side, and I just last I knew there was still a question about that. I was just wondering if you could speak more to that.
Yes, I plan to further on in my presentation.
Awesome, thanks.
Yep. So before I move on, does anyone else want to have some input on variable versus fixed? Okay. I see your note, Tim. Okay, so we met with Texas County Appraisal District, and they gave us some information regarding property tax exemption. And so in short, it is available to a third-party owned system. So what you would need to do up front and prior to the system being energized is notify TCAD that you're working on a project that is going to be owned by you and not the building owner. And that's going to keep TCAD from seeing that project on an aerial photograph and then assessing a value to that project to the property, and then reaching out to the property to say, hey, your property tax is going up because you have solar on your roof. Because that would might, alarm customers. I'm sure they don't want their property taxes to go up. And so then, prior to the 1st of January, you need to submit the property tax exemption form to TCAD, and they said that that would be accepted. So if that doesn't happen, then the property tax will be assessed, and it will be assessed to the customer, or if you've notified them that it's yours, but you never turned in the exemption form, then it'll be assessed to you until you get that exemption form submitted. So if there's a transfer of ownership of the solar property, you need to notify TCAD of that. And then the new owner, if they want to get a property tax exemption, they'll need to submit the proper forms for that. Okay. Any questions?
So it's 100% exemption, it's not a reduction?
It's 100% exemption. At the end of the life, when the system is removed, then you would need to also notify TCAD. Any questions about property tax exemption?
Did you say that they don't care if it's in front of the meter or behind the meter?
I didn't say, but we did discuss that, and they did not say that there was any difference.
Okay.
They are aware that the owner of the system is not the owner of the building, to be clear. Okay. So for the bonus tax credits, what it's looking like for this program is that what would be eligible is the 10% low income community bonus tax credit, which is on top of the 30% tax credit. We haven't discovered a path by which we can leverage the category 4 or qualified low income economic benefit project, which, we do sort of meet the requirements for, because we're passing savings on to low income customers. But it currently is not administratively feasible for us to provide that information to them in the format that they currently are looking for it, as we understand it. So we will keep an eye on that. Just so you guys know, they have released more information on that, is my understanding. And like right now, if you have a project that you're doing in some area that is going to be for a qualified low income economic benefit project, now's the time to get in the queue for that. So just, I think they are going to begin receiving applications when?
Next week through
28th.
the 28th
For
through
30
June
days.
28th. Yeah, 30 days.
So starting the 28th and for 30 days. And if you get your application in anytime during that time, it's all considered at the same time. But after that, it's first come, first serve, as I understand it.
You're saying for this calendar year, and then the next year there's another batch, right?
That's right. Yeah, and we'll continue to look at it and see if they've changed the guidelines to make it more friendly to what we would need to provide. But essentially, as the system owner, you would need to apply for that, and you need to provide customer account information, which we cannot provide to you. So that's where the rub is for us.
Seemed like you were implying that the asset owner could apply for it because Austin Energy is essentially selling the electricity to the LMI community. Is that what you were?
That's what our premise was, and what we tried to explore. But because of the documentation that they provide, that you're required to provide,
Right.
we are not able to provide that documentation to you because it would include, they're requiring customer level information that we're not allowed to dish
I
out.
thought you said that was for the 20%, though, but for the
That's the
10%,
20%,
it's not
yes. For the local, the low income community,
Yeah.
10%, you would be eligible for that as long as the system is built in any green area on this map. So there's a link to this map, and we'll provide this presentation to y'all, and you can follow that link and dig into it a little bit. But from our analysis, these are the areas, and that's pretty broad. At least on the east side, I think it's a good, open territory. And so this would, directly benefit your finances. It's not going to feed back to us, but, this would encourage you to identify sites in these disadvantaged communities.
Just to add to that real quick, they did clarify a lot of FAQs, and they're constantly clarifying questions that come in about these low-income bonuses. The previous slide had a link to a brand new homepage that they made with lots of resources, a checklist of the documentation needed. It's pretty cleanly laid out. So I strongly recommend going to that website, seeing what it's all about. And just to be clear, this is a two-step application process. First, during this May to June window, you have to apply for allocation. Once that's granted and the system is installed, you have to apply for that tax credit officially within application itself.
Assuming that you've been approved at the
Assuming.
application stage.
Yeah.
Were there any other barriers to the 20%, or was it the personal information, customer information stuff?
The customer information is
No
the
other
main
barrier.
barrier. So while Austin Energy could leverage that for our own projects, it would be difficult for us to enable a third party to leverage it for our program, unfortunately. But we will be voicing that concern and trying to work with them to identify a path forward where we could leverage that. And we have let me get to that.
It seems like because you have this virtual billing methodology for something like a multifamily, you could demonstrate that the power is in fact going to those people, right? So that might be a way.
You have to
Well,
provide
the power from these systems goes to us.
Right.
And then we administer it through the community solar program. And that's how we provide those benefits through to low income customers.
Right.
So they want the subscribers
They
information?
want a list of subscribers.
They
And
have
we
to
just
prove
can't
their
give that information out. But we'll continue to explore it again. And so here's a note online. As far as the 20% IRA bonus tax, our bonus goes, it's a 51% requirement LMI. So it could be that subscribers submit to a petition of interest separate from their AE account that the developing company administers. So a suggestion to get around the need is to leverage private data. Okay. We can talk, I'd be interested to explore that. I'm not exactly sure how that really works.
I think that's how it works with a lot of community solar programs. There's a separate entity that goes and recruits the subscribers, right? So they have their personal information because they're recruiting them.
Yeah.
So it's not that different, it seems like.
But it does have to be in coordination with us, because we can't be allowing people to subscribe online while, someone's out there approaching our customers and getting their subscription, in advance on paper. And we have to manage queues for that. So we could have some separate discussion on that. Let's work to, put together a smaller group of people interested in that process to kind of workshop that and discuss that further.
I would just say that kind of data anonymization strategy and integration exists in healthcare. There's ways to do it in a HIPAA compliant way, which is the term we use in healthcare.
Mm-hmm.
GDPR is another term that people use all the time. I don't know what, I think there may be something similar in, just in terms of, that could be used.
Can you mute online, please? Yeah, and I, if we can, I would like to see if we can't get a resource from the DOE to help us navigate that issue, and because I don't want to send y'all down a false path, right? That's not viable, and then you base your financing and everything on it, and then, something happens. So let's solidify it and let's explore it further. But I like that there's an opportunity for it. It's encouraging.
I also want to say that we did reach out to 20 plus other utilities, and we either didn't receive a response or they haven't gone through this bonus credit method themselves. Even at the Renewable Energy Plus conference in Houston last week, we asked around about it, a couple presentations that asked the question, and no hands went up to anyone who's gone through the process last year. So we don't even have any examples on the table. As far as
So if any of y'all do have an example of a
please,
utility that's
please
successfully doing this or getting to that end, let us know and we'll reach out to them and try to involve them in that stakeholder discussion. Okay.
I have a question about the property tax exemption. This is Leslie.
Yes.
The example that they use in a document I tried to share with everyone, it's a PDF, so I wasn't able to do that, is that you use the energy on site during the day and then draw from the grid at night and send excess. And it's my recollection that the legislation that's being used for this talks about using the energy on site. Has that changed, or or is that wrong?
We explained thoroughly what the situation was to TCAD, and we also saw that language, and their interpretation was that they would be able to issue the property tax exemption.
Are you going to get that in writing, or?
We have done some follow-up, and I'll see what we can do to get that in writing for everyone's comfort.
Yes. Okay, thanks.
Yep. So, and we have been searching or exploring a path to potentially be able to enable a customer side interconnection where we bill that customer as if it were interconnected on the utility side of the meter. And I'll say that path is starting to look like it's not viable. There is concern about having a service behind a service. And so we're further exploring the municipal code to make sure that the initial interpretation, which basically says you can't do that, is correct. But that's kind of where we're at on that. That's one hurdle. There's another hurdle in that we would have to do a enhancement to the billing system that can be prohibitively costly. So we're doing an analysis to determine what that cost would be. If there is no legal hurdle there, and if the cost is something that's palatable, then we would move forward with that because we believe that it would simplify things, both in the short term and long run. We know that there can be challenges to utility site interconnections. We know that for sure. We have firsthand experience on that. We've been able to enable a behind the meter interconnection with utility site billing for the airport, but that doesn't run into the legal issues because the airport is also owned by the city like we are. So we're the same entity. But where you have separate entities there, that could be a concern, could be a potential access concern. So that said, we continue to explore it, but it's not looking like a rosy outcome in that regard. So the alternative is utility site interconnection. We have also explored that, and we do have interconnection guidelines to that end. So if you're really interested, you can go into our distribution interconnection guide and look to see what our standards are there. So that kind of covers some of the legal aspects of the customer side of the meter interconnection. So there's also been some discussion about the cost to the utility for accessing the distribution grid. So as it pertains to rate making for the utility, we follow general rate making practices, one of which is cost causation, which basically says that you try to allocate costs to the people that are causing the costs, to the customer groups that are causing the costs. So as we explore this, it may be determined that there is like an interconnection fee or something required to that end to cover those costs to access the distribution grid. Any questions about that?
How much would that be if there was a fee?
We have no idea because really need to discover what that cost is. So that's going to take an analysis. I don't know when that would come into play, but it does require analysis. We do know that we're doing a separate analysis as per the settlement agreement for the value of solar that has us exploring the distribution capacity benefits of solar and benefits / cost, because we don't know if there is a cost or a benefit there. There's arguments in either direction. If for example, we were utilizing non-wires alternative strategies, then we could potentially point to a direct benefit and avoided costs or deferred costs. But we currently do not do that. We're getting to that point, but we're not there yet. The utilization of and pushing electrons across equipment is an argument for the cost. And so we also need to, explore that with someone with a lot of electrical knowledge and experience in rate making to be able to determine that. And as I said, that will happen through a third party and by the end of next year. But I don't know how that impacts the cost and the design of this program up front.
Thanks. Just to follow up, it seems like where they are co-located with load, at a customer location, that from an impact on the system, on the equipment, it would be basically the same as behind the meter, in that the energy would, be flowing to that customer, even though it's not behind the meter, right?
I understand, and I'll say, on its face, I share that view, but I'm not an engineer and I don't have the expertise to know that definitively. would reduce cost or cause costs either way. And, you know, from what I've been told from finance, the customer, if it's behind the customer meter and it's a customer-owned system, then the allocation of cost to access the distribution grid are already being borne by that customer. And so, you know, they're paying into that. If a third party were to own that system, they don't have any charges that are being passed through to them. So, you know, they would say that potentially there could be costs that need to be allocated to the third party.
Do you have separate to address resilience, backup?
Oh, you kind of broke up there. I didn't catch that whole question.
Sorry, I was just wondering if you had a separate slide that addresses using these systems if paired with batteries for backup power.
I do not have that a slide like that in this presentation. But I can say that it is technically feasible to have a disconnect. Like the order would be transformer, disconnect, battery interconnection, and solar interconnection, customer meter, customer load, where the disconnect would isolate the system from the grid and enable the ability to microgrid. That is possible, if that's what you're asking.
And is it your understanding that it would be palatable to, you know, I guess, build into the, I guess, agreement as part of this program, that if the customer wants to do that, that it will be allowed if done in the right way?
I think so. We'll have to look at that, but I don't see why not, as long as it's interconnection approved.
And is that, I know we're not like talking about solar for all, but is this basically how you're gonna do solar for all as well?
We're not sure yet. We still need to explore that. You know, I think one of the significant differences for solar for all is the intent to pass that ownership to the customer after 15 years. And so that it would be very advantageous to have that interconnection behind the customer meter. And maybe that's set up in some way that is more akin to a lease agreement, that, you know, the type of agreement that's currently being done in the state. But it's, again, it's an area that we're exploring with legal, and hopefully I'll have more information on that at the Solar for All meeting, especially as it pertains to that, but also more information for y'all based on as it pertains to the standard offer. So I've got a couple questions online here. Is there or will there be a hosting capacity map made publicly available so that we can cite projects where they're least likely to cause issues? We are working on this. We're hoping to make that map available. We understand the need, and we've been working towards that functionality for many years. We're getting close, as I've been told. So that said, there's no promises there, but I would say that it is certainly on our roadmap. Another question, will a community solar value of solar have the 1 megawatt limit? I.e., if it's less than 1 megawatt, it's 9.91 cents per kilowatt hour. And if it's over a megawatt, it's 7.24 cents per kilowatt hour. Yes, because if a system that's interconnected is over a megawatt, then we have to claim that, and we no longer receive transmission benefits for that system. So what we do is reduce the value of solar rate by the transmission benefit value. Any questions on that? So now I want to quickly talk about some of the risks that we've kind of identified, and their risks to y'all, risks to host customers, and risks to ourselves. And I just kind of want to put out on the table, or open it up for exploration, some of these risks. So one scenario that was discussed was like, okay, what if there's another hailstorm? Which, in case you didn't know, there was like a microclimate hailstorm in Austin that took out megawatts of solar here locally, including our own 600 kW system that's on the roof of this building. And boy, did it do some major damage. I've seen many hailstorms come through Austin and practically no solar damage from them, maybe a panel or two here or there. But practically all of our panels are destroyed with holes completely through them, you know. So that said, can you mute online, please? Tim, can you please mute? Thank you. So the question is like, if you guys owned a standard offer array, or multiple ones on our customer rooftops, and there was hail damage, what keeps a company from just folding and walking away and leaving that customer with garbage solar on their roof? So insurance. Yeah, so you would typically have insurance no matter what for those kind of things, and it would cover that kind of stuff.
Yep.
And the likelihood of you leaving a underperforming or non-performing system on a customer roof and would be.
I would say the majority of these projects are all going to be financed, which requires insurance on the asset.
Right.
Unless there's a high net worth individual that
Can self-finance it.
Self-financing it, I doubt it.
Makes sense. Reasonable argument. Okay, what if a customer stops allowing you access to a site? Would that be covered through a hosting agreement that you would have with that customer, and then you would have your own repercussions?
Right.
That's kind of what I thought too. Just wanted to make sure. And then, like, how often do you guys see these ownership changes potentially happening? Because I know that we have a system that's changed ownership. Like, is that something that happens frequently out there? And what kind of risks are associated with that you would see maybe from our perspective or from the customer's perspective? And how can we mitigate those risks?
I mean, it's a good chance that they're gonna sell the system to a larger, like, institutional portfolio. But all the terms and conditions stay the same. The typical on the front end agreements with the host customer are for the life of the project.
Okay, which would include maintenance and everything else. Okay.
Site access would stay the same.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And then, you know, if we were to go like a value of solar route that doesn't necessarily have an end date, which I think is somewhat advantageous because that way you're not having to remove a project before its useful life is over. And we all know that useful life may be, in some cases, 10 years more than other cases, right? How would we ensure that once it reaches its useful life, that it's being uninstalled and disposed of properly? Like, can you guys imagine a way or a clause that we could have some kind of a requirement to ensure that that happens?
I mean, typically the hosting agreements have a deconstruction clause in there and what that entails.
Would that hosting agreement be something that y'all could share with us so that we could infer there was such a clause?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, and then what we would likely do also is have a customer agreement form to notify them that that is a required clause within their hosting agreement. As well as other things that are meant to protect the host. There may, we're gonna come up with some clauses there that we'll want to see in those hosting agreements. Make sense?
Yeah.
Any questions about that online? Okay. So we've discussed all that. So now, that's what I wanted to cover in this meeting. And I'll just open up the floor, to further discussion. We've got another 19 minutes. Yes, sir.
So we talked a lot about the LMI 10%. There was a discussion in my circle about the domestic content 10% and how that does or does not apply under a third-party ownership. Do you have any data about that?
I don't, but that's something that we can look into.
Okay, second question is, well, my understanding is, but I haven't seen it in writing, is that it has to be third-party owned in order to qualify for domestic content. Like, it can't be the homeowner owning it, which is kind of strange. That's why I think it's worth looking into some more.
Okay. And this is on a commercial level.
I don't have any more insight.
Okay, well, we'll look at that from both perspectives.
And then you were talking about how, there's a limited megawatts for this federal money, for the LMI money, and there's a window that's 30 days from starting soon, that's 30 days or whatever that window is. So my question is there any kind of support from Austin Energy that you can provide to the developers to be going to these multifamily properties or commercial buildings to say, look, this is a real thing, it's really happening. You can trust us even though you don't know us at all, but if Austin Energy behind it, the federal government's behind it. What can we do to convince those people to even sit down with us as somebody they don't know out of the blue?
Yeah, well, when we
In the next 30 days, even well before you
Well,
launch
I
the
know.
program.
I can't I can tell you for certain,
Yeah.
we're not gonna launch this program in the
Right.
next 30 days.
Right.
Once we launch the program,
Yeah.
there will be information on our website that, and marketing from us
Yeah.
that will help you guys, ensure the validity of the program to our customers.
Which only applies to the next window, which is next year, is what you're saying.
Right, yeah, so that's probably the next opportunity for that 20% especially.
Yeah.
But in general, we're going to support the program with some marketing and some website presence that you can point to customers so that they know that it's valid.
I think the 10%, it just opens up. So I mean, like, you can apply for it as long as all the funds are still available, but you can still apply for it afterwards.
You do need an allocation to do during the window though, and to apply for that allocation, you do need some specifics like system size.
Right.
That can't change later on. You need your system size, you need your longitude, latitude of the project. Like certain specifics are needed at the application point.
Okay, so that's really for, you have to establish that within that month window,
You need it before or at the month window, yes.
and you can't do it afterwards? I think you can.
Yeah, they're not accepting applications outside of that month window.
I mean, they are, if you want to get in, I'm sorry.
It's
Yeah,
first come,
if-
first
if
served,
you-
is what I'm saying.
Right, it's
Yeah.
first come, first served.
Yes.
And I thought isn't there dollars that are allocated for regions?
I don't know about for region, I just know the allotment, megawatt capacity for the category. I think it's 800, 800 megawatts here. I will say that every category was filled last year except for category 3. They had you can see 24
Right.
megawatts left over.
They
And they
filled
kind of
those
adjusted.
categories last year? They filled them?
I think everyone but one, yeah.
And no one at the conference raised their hand and said they had an experience.
Exactly, yeah, I was kind of surprised.
Okay.
Yeah, and they kind of adjusted the allotments from last year as well.
So what's also relevant here is you've talked about in the past 20 megawatts as the goal for the standard offer program. Is that still the goal? Because you didn't mention it today.
No, I think that our approach is going to be that we're going to price it in a way that it's palatable for us to continue to adopt without limit.
That's important.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, similar to the value of solar. You know, it's only limited by our customers' participation.
Someone asked if we're going to distribute the presentation.
Yes. Any other questions?
Anything else online?
I saw that, which is great.
It would be super cool if
Like
you
that.
could have at some point an example of a multifamily property and a commercial property and actually showing something of how the economics would work for them coming from your brand as a potential.
Like a case study?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like you have that nice one for Mother's Milk on your website,
Right.
which is great.
Yes. I think that would be in order.
I think
Some kind of a
that's
case
really,
study.
As we get closer and closer to launch, I think that's a really good idea.
Because I think a lot of the questions that came up, so we had a meeting at a solar group a couple weeks ago, and we were talking about multifamily and how does the money work and how does the electricity flow between the property owner and the tenants and the money and all those variables. And it may seem simple, but it could also seem complicated. So just explaining that on a 1 or 2 pager would be helpful.
Sure.
So to confirm, what we're talking about in this scenario is really just roof rent for the property owner. Simple, just like they have rent for the apartment inside their walls. Now they're getting rent for the roof also. So that should be a simple way to explain it to them. But I can see that they could get confused because they also have the option of getting a bill credit. And now that the amount of money is the same, it can be confusing. But essentially,
But one way is them investing in a system,
right,
and another way is just them allowing you to access
right.
their roof to host the system. So
Right.
that's significant difference.
Yeah.
But to that end, like when we're approaching different city departments to try to do community solar projects on their roof, like one of their concerns is always like, well, what if I want to do a project for myself and put it behind the meter? Right? And I think it's wise to address that up front with the customer so that you don't end up in the back end with that concern after it's too late for them to potentially address it, and that's part of the compensation conversation, right? That when you're discussing and negotiating the roof lease or whatever type of lease, it's that opportunity cost that needs to be potentially discussed there.
And did we talk about this last time, that is it possible to have the array do both things, or 2 different arrays do two different things? Like
If you had 2 interconnections, one in front of the meter and one behind the meter,
is that feasible?
you could split that up, yeah. And then for what's behind the meter, if they're eligible for incentives, we'll incentivize them.
Because it seems like an apartment building would want to offset their electricity cost for their office, let's say, and the pool,
Yeah, you could
Not
connect
necessarily
behind their
for
house
connections.
meter.
and then they can get revenue for that other part of the array.
Right, yeah, but that would have to be physically, separated, right? Two separate physical interconnections. But yes, that would be possible.
Cool.
Any other questions?
I guess, do you have a sense yet of what the application process to work with you on this is? That's still in development over the next couple of months.
Yeah, I mean, I can roughly tell you what that will look like because we intend to use the same system that we use for other applications. So we have a web-based online platform through which, you would have to register with us to be able to submit applications. we probably do some, really preliminary stuff to ensure that you're qualified and stuff like that, but nothing, no huge barriers there. Then, you would be able to submit that application online. It goes through different workflow step processes with us and series of reviews and automated communications and everything. We would make sure that the fields are limited so that you're not making mistakes, or if you put in a number that's too far outside that, you get a quick pop-up message and it lets you know, hey, are you sure you mean to put 3,000 megawatts on this building? Because stuff like that. And then if the system itself facilitates the back and flow process of you are doing the interconnection, and we're doing that inspection and the meter setting, and then you have permission to operate, and all of that is going to be automated through that system and managed through that system. So it's pretty easy. And we would also have training available for staff people on your side to understand how to interact with it, but it's not rocket science. It's very easy.
Thank you.
Yeah, I see a hand up. You want to go ahead, Kaiba?
I'm sorry. I had a question and I just totally forgot it. So it'll come back to me.
That's okay.
It happens.
Mainly what I was driving at, Tim, was like the timeline. So if you launch it in October and we apply in October and we have the properties and all the paperwork, how long before we can start putting panels on roofs?
Yeah, generally that initial review of an application takes us 2 to 3 weeks, maybe at the very beginning of the program. If there's like an influx of applications at some point, that can be longer. But typically, you submit an application, we review it. If there's a need to amend it or change it, if there's a flaw in the application, then there's a back and forth process there that can happen. But generally speaking, at least for incentive applications, we process those within a week because, we have that process totally down. But yeah, it's not going to be a long delay.
Your longer lead is permitting.
Yeah, and the longest lead is the shutdown, because this would require a full shutdown at the transformer. So, there are parts in Austin, areas of town where that shutdown wait time is 6 months.
That's where we need a really big battery.
About to keep it on.
Yeah.
You got the energized to do the work.
I know.
Yeah, the shutdown happens all in one day,
Right.
but it's waiting for that one day is a 6-month wait.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and we're working on trying to improve that as well. So that's another topic. All right. Any other questions? Going once, going twice. All right. Well, thanks y'all. This has been a very informative meeting for us. We appreciate your time and collaboration. And
I remembered my question.
all right. What is it? What do you got?
Sorry. Decommissioning and recycling, are there going to be any requirements?
Yes, we do. We do intend to have decommissioning and recycling requirements. And as alluded to earlier, that would be something that would be that would need to be in the hosting agreement. And so that would be a clause that we would put in there to notify the customer that that clause needs to be in there. And then upon application review, we would also ensure that that was in there as well. And then, another thing that we're working on is supplying customers and contractors with resources for recycling. We know that those will change over time. So the idea is that when we do a final inspection, we would put a QR code on the equipment that would lead to a web page with the latest resources that, available for, recycling, et cetera. And that, what our plan is to do that across the board for all interconnections, whether they're through standard offer or customer owned or whatever. All right, with that, we'll close it out. Thank you all. We really appreciate you and your participation here, and looking forward to having a good program.